little bit of procedural matter to take care of first, so give us 1 minute. 30 seconds, get the instrument ready, and then we'll tune up and go. My first semester of student teaching, which was 30 years ago for me here. But it was because of an experience that I had with the choir at the high school where I did my student teaching that this has always rather intrigued me, because we're told what to do in the textbooks, but what do you do in real life? Just so that we have a better understanding, how many of you are principally instrumentalists and vocal choral? You have a good representation. So let me just start by saying that it was my student teaching year, being someone who's primarily a band and orchestra background, first time I saw a choir in which the choir director didn't set up like the basses in the middle and the tenors and sopranos, altos, all grouped together in sections, but made the arrangement on the choral risers small quartets. So you have one soprano, alto, tenor, bass together, and next to them is another soprano. So the entire makeup of the entire choir was actually scattered throughout in quartets throughout. And I thought, wow, could we do that in band or not? It's just an idea that's been intriguing me ever since. The CSUN Wind Symphony is our second concert band. It's our B band, so to speak here. It's rather inclusive group. We have first-year freshmen and graduate performance majors. We have composition majors, therapy majors, music education majors, as well as performance majors. We have 1 or 2 non-music majors who audition well enough to get in this group. Many of the students are in here because it's part of their degree requirements. Many students are here because of the opportunity that the second band provides. Several of the students that you see out in front of you, they're not playing on their primary instrument, they're playing on their secondary. I think we have at least 1 or 2 students playing on a tertiary instrument right now as well. We have composition students who are learning how to score for band by playing in band. I love this band because it really is more representative of the diversity and typically more of what you're going to have in a public school setting. You don't conduct all performance music majors with your junior high band ensemble necessarily. And boy, do you ever have perfect or ideal instrumentation? No. Scanning here quickly with the instruments here, go ahead and raise your instrument if you're playing flute or piccolo. That's how many flutes we have, which is a rather small number compared to some bands, isn't it? Double reeds, clarinets, saxophones. That's real world. Yes, it is. Trumpets. Real world. French horns. Real world. Actually, that's probably better than real world, isn't it? Trombones. Yay. Euphonium. And tuba. And string bass as well as contrabass, clarinet, and percussionists in the back and the corners as well. All right, so we're going to start our session today with playing an original band composition by Beethoven. He actually wrote a handful of original band works. This is his Ecosse, the Scottish dance Ecosse, written in 1810. Beethoven. It doesn't sound right, does it? Doesn't sound right. By the way, they memorized this composition just for you here today as well. So you'll notice there's no music stands because we're going to move around here. Now you might think at first, boy, that's a beautiful bass sound. Boy, that's a real nice foundation. But what perhaps you didn't hear, you're going to hear just the woodwinds at the beginning. Woodwinds open. The melody! That's kind of important, don't you think, with a composer like Beethoven? So, with our flutes all the way in the back here, it gets covered up with the instruments that are in front. You'll notice on the handout that quote that I have from Dr. Navarre about where to place the flutes. This is out of his beginning band textbook. Always put flutes up front or no one will be able to hear them. I'm intrigued by that because oftentimes when going out and doing rehearsals and clinics with typical instrumentation, the flute section is so large you can't hear anything but flute. So should they be up front? And that's going to be our exploration for today. Just because the textbook says this, is that what we really ought to do for the best product and your students have the best musical experience? I'm going to ask the musicians of the Wind Symphony now to go to the proper setup, or our typical setup. Notice I'm breaking Dr. Navarre's rule here. We have clarinets up front, but the flutes are close behind, along with our double reeds in the second row. And here's the exact same opening of the Beethoven composition, but with our standard seating arrangement that we're using for this semester with this group. Stuff as well. So over the course of our session here, we're going to see if we can figure out perhaps even a better seating arrangement. But before we do that, we have to understand about seating arrangements. So come over here on no MP3 files today, live musicians, no PowerPoint presentation, old school whiteboard. So when we think about the typical setup of a symphony orchestra, we have in the arcs in the front the string section. And then the wind players of an orchestra typically behind in straight rows. This is the most common setup. It's not the only setup, but it's the most common setup that we see. And so we ask ourselves, well, why is this? Why is this set up in this particular way? And why, 100 years ago, back in the 1920s and into the 1930s, when University of Illinois and other Midwest universities started the first modern band programs that we still pattern ourselves after today, and the first high school band programs started coming into existence the way that we think of band programs today. Why did these large concert bands of the 1920s and 30s, their band directors, try to emulate an orchestra setup for the concert band? Well, the concert band takes these arches that we know from the orchestra string section for all the woodwind and brass instruments. What's the goal? Well, in orchestra, you want a blended string section. Your violins, cellos, violas, basses, they're all facing in where they're seated to where the conductor stands, so there's a central sonic focal point. This is where all the sound converges. So this setup enhances the blending of the sound. You want a blended sound. Contrast that with the woodwind and brass section of a typical setup of an orchestra that are in straight rows. Here you might have 18 first violins, 18 second violins, 12 cellos, etc. In other words, there's a lot of players on each one of the parts. In the wind section, one player per part, one first flute, one second flute, one first oboe. So the strings are a section of doubling, the winds are sections of all soloists. So while the setup for the string section of the orchestra converges the sound, so you get a blended string sound, the whole point of the wind sections being of all soloists is that their sound cuts through as solo sounds. So they're set up in straight rows, so their sound is heard as a section of soloists. The early band directors of the 1920s and 30s wanted to make this blended band sound, even though you have all these different types of instruments. So concert bands from the 1920s and 30s did set up in straight rows. They set up in arcs. Why? So that it would enhance the blending of the sounds together of all the woodwind and brass instruments. And because the violin section is the core section, the primary part of most string writing, especially in the classical tradition, the first violin section is here. Early band directors put the clarinet sections over as here, which was the lead voice for concert bands back in the 1920s and 30s. So the whole point of this setting up in arcs or semicircles was to get a blended sound with all these disparate instruments, but get a blended sound together. Now, 1950s come along, and this man, Frederick Fennell, at the Eastman Conservatory of Music, has an idea for a new type of concert band. He wasn't going to replace the big concert band concept. It was going to be an additional new type of concert band, in which he took the wind section of an orchestra and made it a standalone ensemble. A standalone ensemble, just the woodwinds and brass with the percussion of a wind section. So you'd have only one player per part. And instead of having 8 first clarinets, you'd have only 1 first clarinet. So his setup, the wind ensemble setup that Fennell came up with in the 1950s, took this wind section of an orchestra and made it a standalone ensemble. Right, left, you see right, tight. There we go. So instead of setting up his wind ensemble in arcs, he kept the straight lines so that all of the instrument sounds were coming together or are going to the audience as an ensemble of soloists. This is to blend the sound together. This is to accentuate the soloistic nature of wind ensemble. So when we have concert bands, whatever we might call it, we might even call our concert band a wind ensemble, but if we're doubling parts on various instruments or we're going for the large ensemble size, setting up in straight rows does not produce the best sound. Setting it up in arcs allows the sounds to converge so you get that more blended, desirable sound of the mix of all the brass and woodwind instruments along with the percussion. In fact, if you look a little bit further, in fact, on your handout, I think this is on the second page of your handout. When you look at a typical wind section, first 2 rows are woodwinds, right? So on an orchestra wind section, who are these players right here? What instrument? On this side? Flutes. And on this side? Oboes. Back row. This side or second row? Clarinets, and here, bassoons. So you have this octet of 8 instruments in classical scoring. Which one of these 2 flutists is the principal, the outside or the inside player?
Inside.
Inside player. Clarinet, outside or inside? Bassoon, outside or inside? Inside. So you have your principal players all together in this quartet on the center line. So when we see wind sections of orchestra, the principal players tend to be centered and then move out of the parts. Does this mean that we want to do this with concert band setting as well, with the principals on the inside? No. We want the principals to be on the outside for the most part. There's a couple of exceptions. And why? This configuration enhances the soloistic nature of wind ensemble. This configuration enhances the blending of sounds together. So we don't want the principal players to stick out. We want them to be in the foreground, but blended with the section together. So when we look at concert band settings, typically the principal player is going to be here. Here's the first clarinet. Here's the first flute, if you have clarinets in the first row. With one exception, and that is the further back you go, then you have to move the principal parts to center. For instance, tuba. We want that center so the tuba sound is going out throughout the entire band. So the further the back, more center for the principal players, but in the front, more on the outside. Now, you can keep talking about this and get all geeked out about seating charts here all the time here. But the point is, the main point is that if you set up your band in arcs, the whole point of that setup is to blend all the instruments together. If you have a small ensemble of soloists, straight lines are going to enhance that soloistic quality. From the top, let's get this back to the ears. This semester we have 6 clarinetists in our Wind Symphony. I put them all in the front row because number-wise, that's a little bit low given the overall size of the band. So I put all of the clarinets in the front row rather than clarinets over here and flutes over here like I normally would do for a concert band setup. But let's try something out here. Let's bring the flutes and piccolos down to the front row, and basically flutes and clarinets switch places with each other. Woodwinds. Right away. We have not heard the flute presence like that so far this morning. And this is a good improvement. This is the direction that we want to go. All right. No percussion, all brass and woodwinds, but no percussion. Has anyone not heard that before, the pyramid principle of balance of sound? We all know. Okay, so the pyramid principle balance of sound is that the lower the instrument is, the more you want, more volume you want of that instrument. So in the pyramid principle, this is just a theory, by the way, like evolution and so the higher range the instrument is, top of our pyramid would be piccolo, the least amount of volume you want of that. So if everyone's playing forte, everyone has forte dynamic, the piccolo is playing the softest forte. The lower the range of the instrument, you're down at the bottom of the pyramid, we want more of the sound. So the tubas and string bass and contrabass and clarinet, their forte is going to be on the louder side of a typical forte. And this concept gives it that dark, this is one of the tools that we use to get that dark blended sound that we want in a concert band type of setting. So, with this setting right here, are we getting, in this room, with these acoustics, with this hodgepodge instrumentation, are we getting plenty of tuba right now? Yeah. Take a listen to it. You getting? No percussion. Yeah, we're hearing nice tuba back there along string bass and contrabass. So We can't move them any further back. They're as far back as we can go here. So what's the next step? Well, this is the best arrangement that we have given our room space and our instrumentation. So now we employ, all right, tubas, you don't need to be that prominent. The bottom of the pyramid is good, so play this less forte at the beginning, tubas. Everyone else keep it at the same volume. Normally, we tell them a little bit less on the softer side of what their dynamic is. Is that going to work here with our numbers and balance? No. We want them to play out a little bit more. Flutes, first clarinets in particular, piccolo, oboe, play out some more. Tubas less, no percussion. Everyone else, ready? Directing their attention to it is coming out prominently. Let's go to what I call euphemistically marching band placement. So for this, I'd like trumpets to come in the front 2 rows. Flutes and oboe and clarinets go way in the back. Tubas go in the second row center. Everyone else stand up and move out of the way. Trumpets up front. Center, yeah, tubas in the center. There we go. Trombones, let's put them right here in the front, towards the front. French horns, euphoniums over here, towards the front. Bassoon in the back. Marching band. French horns front, euphonium side. In saxophones, you're like the frosting in between the layers of the cake. You just fill in between. Percussion back in. Everyone, please. Move up. Not a smidge. You can hear a lot of nice trumpet playing here, fanfare. We're going to skip to the trio. Contrasting section, soft dynamic. Trio, everyone. Ready? And. Sound is going all off in different directions. As a starting point, as a general rule, not all the time, but as your starting point, having the trumpets front and center, tubas center, midway, woodwinds in the back, because frankly they're just not loud enough in an outdoor setting. They're not loud enough typically. Trombones and French horns splitting on either side. This is sort of a textbook starting point for marching band arrangement. It works well on the outside, but it definitely does not work at all on the inside. Now, the reason why I picked this Beethoven piece is it's almost always 2D scoring all the way through here. Everyone's playing almost the entire time in the same composition, so you're able to hear this constant homogeneous sound, and yet, depending on where the instruments are placed, certain parts are easily heard and other parts are completely obliterated altogether. Right, based upon what we've heard so far, aside from we've identified, it's hard in this room with this instrumentation sometimes to hear the melody instruments, the flutes, the oboes, and the clarinets in particular, in the A section of this composition. Is there any other part right now that you've noticed, you know, I don't think I've really heard that instrument yet in any of the configurations? Has there been any instrument that you haven't heard yet?
Horns.
Horns. Where are horns? And how many do we have? Actual, true, legitimate, bona fide French horns? We have three. We have three here. And so this semester, we've actually done some clever editing. We have three horns. Most horn parts are going to be 4 horn parts. And so we actually have 2 honorary alto saxophones, French, whatever. What do we call them? Fralto horns. There we go, fralto horns. And so we have 2 alto saxophonists who are playing the lower French horn parts, transposing, of course, from the E flat to the F part. So at the beginning, just the French horns of honorary French horns at the beginning. Ready? And. What's another instrument that perhaps you haven't really heard yet? The bassoon? Yeah. The flight of the bassoonist, the only bassoonist back there. Yeah, one player. Where are you going to put the bassoonist? One player. Front or back? Towards the front, towards the back?
Front.
The front, that's right. Because remember, the further back, the more blend that we get, the more mixing together. So we run in the front. And if it's going to be in the front, is it going to be front center or front outside? Based upon, do we want it to be noticed or not noticed? We want to enhance this, right? So do you want it in the center or on the outside? Outside. All right. So perhaps when we go back to a more normal configuration, we might bring our bassoonist, say, down to here, huh? Maybe, or on the opposite side from there. There's one other instrument, and all of them are playing really fine, and of course they're working to get a good balance despite our numbers. What's another instrument that we really haven't heard much of? Not at any fault of the players. Percussion, we're all good. Trombones, we're all good here. What's our section? Trombones.
Trombones.
Yes, there it is. Trombones by yourselves. A true trombone solo. 1, 2, from the beginning, and. Now, perhaps that's the reason why we haven't heard it. It's a total background part, isn't it? We're totally the background. But with our instrumentation that we have this semester, and by the way, the Wind Symphony, my philosophy with this band being our B band, and because it provides so many opportunities for so many students, on their primary instruments, secondary instruments, non-performance majors, performance majors. If you pass the audition, I take you in this group. Now you have to play at the minimal level to get into the group. We don't take anyone, but if you pass the audition, I'll let you in. So yes, sometimes we have 15 saxophones. And so we work on how to make a good sound even with imbalance. So this semester, just the way things are, we have 3 trombones. So again, because of the numbers, we augmented and we have 2 tenor saxophones, 2 tenor saxophonists who are actually playing with the trombones, doubling the second and third, no, first and second, the first and second trombone parts. Let's hear the trombones and the honorary trombones together at the beginning. Ready? And. Now obviously, the tenor saxophone is a totally different timbre. And so we've worked from day one on getting a blend of making sure the projection that the tenor saxophones provide, but blending into the trombone color. But let's say you have only 3 trombones, and you don't have a single student to spare to double, say, tenor saxophones. You only have 1 tenor saxophonist in your group, so you're only going to have that person play an actual tenor sax part. So where might we put the trombones in our setup to help their presence be more prominent given their lower relative numbers? Where do we typically see trombones? Where do you see them on the seating charts, the traditional seating charts like Regents, University of Illinois, or John Locke's from the University of North Carolina. Where do we typically see trombones? In the back, and oftentimes center or just off center. Is that going to work for us here? No way. So where would be a totally, really bizarre, that's where we're going to put the trombones, but when you think about it, we want that presence. Towards the front, instead of in the back. Now what about out on the sides or in the middle?
On the sides.
We said with the bassoon that we perhaps we put it out to the side because it would be more prominent, but with 3 trombones, where might be a better place to put the trombones? Towards the front, but center. And why center? The trombone is one of just a few unidirectional instruments in a concert band instrumentation. Now, none of them are truly unidirectional. If a trombonist stands and plays facing away, we can still hear the trombone. But the bell front instruments of trombone, trumpet, the backwards facing bell of the French horn make these more of unidirectional. Most of their sound is going one direction rather than spread around like all the other omnidirectional instruments. So by putting the trombones towards the center in the front, we take advantage of their their unidirectional, and so we get more presence of their sound. So this is another tool that we have in placing of instruments. If it's a unidirectional instrument and you have a lot of them, trumpets, you have more trumpets than you would choose if you're going for an ideal instrumentation, but because it's a unidirectional instrument, more of the sound coming straight out. Do we want to place the trumpets in the center when we have a lot of them, or perhaps off to the side where the sound is coming more inward rather than straight out towards the audience? We want it on the outside, as you're nodding your heads here, because this way their sound is going more across the band rather than directly out, especially when we're using these arcs, these half semicircles rather than these arcs. Then go back to our regular setup. So when you look at the difference between unidirectional instruments and omnidirectional instruments, for common band instruments, the trumpet, the trombone are forward unidirectional, the French horn is backwards. All the other instruments are omni. Their sound is going, including strings and percussion. They're all omnidirectionals. So those instruments, it's not going to make that much of a difference how their sound is going out to the audience, if they're on the outside or in the center, but the unidirectionals are. So here was our solution that we came up with, given the large number of saxophones, the large number of trumpets, relatively speaking to the overall size of the band, and with our probably fewer than an ideal instrumentation with the clarinets, with the trombones. Notice the trombones are in the third row. The trombones are in the third row, and because we're not doing full semicircle arcs, even Adam here on the outside of the first trombone, the principal player, so he's on the outside. His instrument is still not facing him this way. It's coming out relatively towards the audience, so we get that unidirectional benefit. Trumpets, go ahead, stand up where you are. With the trumpets, because of the large number of trumpets that we have the first trumpets in the front row, second and third trumpets in a second row, instead of having one long line of trumpet. Because what would happen with the trumpets, if we put all the trumpets in one row, is that we would have trumpets now smack dab in the middle, going all the way from over here, all the way down. In other words, the majority of the section would have their instruments facing straight towards the audience. So not only are we sabotaging ourselves by putting instruments in the middle, we're now sabotaging ourselves because we're putting a unidirectional instrument facing straight forward. Thank you. Trombones, stand where you are, honorary trombones. Again, notice we're starting in the center to the outside, and in the third row, we had to move our rows around a little bit to fit in this room from a normal rehearsal room. But notice how in the front half of the band rather than the back half of the band. Sit down. Saxophones. Who are playing saxophone parts, stand up. Yeah, saxophones behind trombones. You bet. Why not? Wonderful players, dedicated musicians, they contribute a lot. We just got too many of them for our overall numbers here. So put them in the back. Thank you. How did the concerto competition go? Went well? We have our department's concerto competition is today. We have several students here are auditioning on the concerto competition, which is why we have players coming in and out here. I'm glad you're with that. And yours went on? Everyone's good. Okay. So what's another possible solution then when you have a large number, especially, what are the three instruments that we tend to have two more of than others in school band programs today that trickles up to the university level? We've identified them already. What are the three overabundant instruments?
Saxophone and trumpet.
Trumpet and flute, the perennial. There's always the flute. So we actually have a more reasonable number of flutes, but in recent years with our Wind Symphony, sometime, just 2 years ago, didn't we have like 11 flutes one semester? Last year we had 8, and the year before it was something like around 11 or so. And for more or less the same size of band, it might have been maybe 5 players altogether more. So for that year, we did what I call the flying wedge. The flying wedge is which you place the instrument that you have more than enough. Instead of in the front row or in 2 consecutive rows, you start with the first player, not in the front row, but in the second row. And I like having my flutes and concert band over on this side, so the conductor's right. So the first flutes were here. The second flutes were in this row, and the third row and fourth row were for the rest of the flute section. So the flute section started as a point up here, basically more or less where Kale is right now, and then as each row, subsequent row, there's an additional player or 2, so you get this wedge of flute sound. Now the advantage of this is because the flute section is moving back this way, is that you get a good section sound, but not the overwhelming top-heavy flute part if they were all sitting in the front row. Let's go back to our pyramid principle. We did that with saxophone, I think, last year as well, didn't we? We had a flying wedge of saxophones last year because, 15 saxophones last year? Yeah, 15. Woo, all good players. So let's go back to our pyramid now, our pyramid of sound, where we want more bass and then we want top, relatively speaking. So with our multiple parts, with clarinets that are typically, an advanced piece is going to be first, second, and third clarinets. French horns, first, second, and third, and fourth French horns. Trumpets, 1, 2, or 3. Or if it's an old composition, first, second, and third cornets, plus first and second trumpets, where you have 5 different trumpet parts. 3 trombone parts, first, second, third trombone, etc. So all these instruments where we have multiple parts, we employ the same idea of the pyramid principle with the distribution of parts. And on your, no, it's not on the handout here, but in essence, we follow this rule. If you're playing an instrument, or excuse me, if you have an instrument that has multiple parts, like clarinets, for example, first, second, and third clarinets, the rule of thumb is that you want more thirds than you want seconds, and you want more seconds than you want firsts. Now this doesn't apply to all the instruments, because unless you have a section of 15 French horns, you're probably going to have 1 player on a part with your 4, or maybe an auxiliary 5th player. If you have 5 French horns in your band, you keep doing what you're doing and share your secret with the rest of the profession, because we should all have that opportunity. But with trumpets as well. So more in the third part than the second, more in the second part than the first. You have mostly thirds, a lesser amount of seconds, and fewer firsts. So this flying wedge configuration works well. I'm going to use Kale as the example. Let's say that Kale is the principal flute. If Kale is the principal flute, there's one on this row here, and then on our second flute row, we'll have, say, maybe 3 flutes. So 1 to 3, and then on our third flute, well, we don't have third flutes, but the point being made here is perhaps we would have 5. Or clarinets would be a better example. We might have 2 first clarinets here, 4 second clarinets here, and boy, wouldn't it be great to have 12 clarinets altogether, 6 clarinets here. We have 6 clarinetists here. How do we divide that up? If this is our ideal rule, if this is our ideal rule, and sometimes it doesn't, the math doesn't, you can't have fractional clarinet players, you can't split it in half. So if you have 6, how many on first, how many on second, and how many on third? 1 on first. Now what do we do? If we have 6 altogether, good. and 3 on 3. Boy, that works out nicely, doesn't it? Okay, what are you going to do if you have 7 clarinets then?
Kick one out.
2, 2, 3 is a
It's just the guitar
possibility.
player.
We don't have more seconds than first, but at least we're not exceeding. So 2, 2, 3 could be a possibility. What's another possibility and being more in spirit of this rule? 1, 1, 3, 3, or
1, 2,
1, 2,
4.
4. 1, 2, 4. So when you have these options, now what are you going to consider? Well, the individual student. Let's say your original idea was going to be 2 firsts, 2 seconds, and 2 thirds. What if you don't have 2 students at this point in their development who are capable of playing the first clarinet part? In which case then, 1 on first, 2 on second would be better for the student. So if the student isn't ready to play first clarinet part this year, then don't put them on the first clarinet part. So there's these other factors that we consider as well. It's not just the numbers, it's not the diagrams. We have to consider where each student is in their development. What's best for the students. And everyone should always have the opportunity to play third. Everyone should have the opportunity to play third at some time in their career. All right. Based upon all these different ideas here, and with the unlimited resources that you have, you, attendees of the conference here today, try to come up with a configuration different from this if you have a better idea. What might be, if you could move a section from there to that point or from over there to down here, try it out. It's like they're clay and you get to mold them here. Robin, what are you thinking back there?
Me as a euphonium player, I would want the euphoniums tubas next to each other because they're playing octaves, kind of the same part.
Okay.
You know.
So do you want the euphoniums to go all the way back to the tubas? Do you want to bring the tubas forward a little bit and the euphoniums back and meet halfway?
Maybe the tubas in the same row, move one row forward so they're not in this row by themselves.
Saxophones, get out of the way. Have the tubas come forward a little bit to their left?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's just, right now for efficiency, let's just make it true tubas. We'll keep contrabass and string bass. And then euphoniums, you want on the outside?
They could stay or they could move that.
Tell them what you want.
Okay, then baritones on the outside, euphoniums on the outside. Again, the reason why, because the parts are the same.
Yep.
Me as a euphonium player.
And you spent your whole life with your mom saying, I can never see you, Robin, why don't you sit up front? Okay, now what are you going to do with the saxophones?
So now the row right in front, they would have to spread out because the altos and the horns are usually the same parts. So I would want I would want them to, kind of together with the principal players and principal alto and principal horn next to each other.
Make it so.
Okay. So am I doing this?
Sure, yes.
Alright. Oh, man, by the way. Was I doing here a year ago? I don't know, I pushed your Alright. So I guess. Again, I'm going to play with this. So again, just because of the numbers, the two, again, I'm going to break the rule. The 2 trumpets, I would put this for number, I would put them in the same row, and then these guys would be in the second row in front of the trumpets and the tubas. So I guess these 2 trumpets are going to just move back, and then again, using the same concept principle from the outside, and then pull them forward. Yeah, I'll put the principal out in the center, and then. Second altos, and then the honorary altos are already in there. And then what are you guys playing?
Tenor.
The tenor part or the
Real saxophones.
Okay.
Saxophone parts on saxophone.
okay, then I guess the tenor's in the center because they're kind of in the same octave as trombones. So tenor sax is in the center. And then
I'm doing bass though.
then you out next to the euphonium. And then very in the center next to the tuba. I don't know.
All right. So Robin's, how would you describe Robin's general approach to this? How is he placing instruments together? By what is shared characteristic?
By what their parts sound like.
What their part of their range is.
Yeah.
Is an alto part generally or a tenor part together. So this is the last, thank you, Robin, for illustrating this. This is the last of what I would consider to be the most significant factors. There are other factors that are more minor, but the significant factors that we really have to be sensitive to when placing arrangements. We're looking at absolute numbers. We're looking at omni versus unidirectional instruments. We're looking at instruments as far as how many parts and the division of parts. You want that blended sound or parts sticking out with a principal player, section player. But this is as far as not just families of instruments, but what part writing the composer. And most composers do tend to group these instruments together. We have those instruments that are considered to be the alto range instruments. Of course, alto saxophone and French horn would be part of that group. Perhaps third trumpet part and third clarinet part would also be considered part of that alto group. So notice that we have, if you were to set up and have the opportunity, the third clarinets right in front of the alto saxophones, we have these altos grouped and these alto voice instruments together and the tenor voice instruments together. Let's hear what it sounds like in the beginning. You want to conduct this?
Is there a score?
It's in two. It's an echo set.
Okay.
Well, I say, if only for fun, clarinets and percussion switch places quickly.
That's a lot of tuba.
While they make that switch, notice what Robin's configuration changed. He brought the tubas, the bass, and many of the tenor voice instruments forward in the seating and towards the outside. And outside again, in the arcs, has more projection, so we were able to get more of that tenor part. They never get to do this. They never get to experience what clarinets and flutes get all the time, and that is the conductor spitting on them accidentally. There we go. I do want to play, the entire composition is 80 seconds long. This echo says 80 seconds, but I do want you to hear all of it. If for no other reason, this is an original band composition by Beethoven, edited for modern instrumentation, but this is an original band work. So as you look at this information that I give you, start with the textbook charts that you see in your Lynn Cooper book or whichever method book that you're using. That's the starting point, but just like we always teach to our students, where is my student in, where are they in their progression, in their development as musicians? We teach to the student, we use these charts as a starting point, and then adjust so that we maximize the learning opportunity for our students over the course of every year as they're in the ensemble. And we use the band as the example here today, but these same principles, of course, apply to orchestra, they apply to marching band, they apply to choir as well. But make sure the fundamental, this configuration of straight lines enhances individual sounds. This configuration with arcs or semicircles enhances a blended sound. This is the CSUN Wind Symphony playing the Beethoven Echo Save without opus number 22, written in the year 1810. enjoy the rest of your day here while you're here at CSUN for all of our visitors, and have a informative, fruitful conference hosted by our NAfME Collegiate Chapter. And hope our paths cross again soon. Thank you. No rehearsal Monday. No rehearsal Wednesday. And because the wind ensemble's going to Hawaii, no rehearsal the following Monday either. Free rehearsal.